The people of Poughkeepsie never saw it coming. For nearly 2 years, a killer moved silently among them, shopping in the same stores, walking the same streets, smiling politely as he passed. Behind the closed doors of a modest Fulton Avenue home, the air was thick with the stench of death, and nobody stopped to open it. The story of Kendall Francois is not one of a shadowy stranger who drifted into town. He was born here on July 26, 1971, the second of 4 children in a Haitian-American family. The Francois home was ordinary enough from the outside. 2 stories, white siding dulled with age, a small yard pressed close to the sidewalk. Neighbors waved politely. No one imagined that it would one day hold the bodies of 8 murdered women. As a child, Kendall was large for his age, quiet, polite, and often withdrawn. At Arlington High School, he played football. Teachers remember him as respectful but unremarkable. After graduation, he joined the United States Army. His service lasted 4 years, ending with an honorable discharge. Returning to Poughkeepsie, he enrolled at Dutchess Community College and took a job at Arlington Middle School as a hall monitor. His size alone commanded attention, 6 feet 4 inches, over 300 pounds. But to the students, he was not just the big guy with a clipboard, he was stinky. The nickname came from a persistent odor that clung to him. Some assumed it was poor hygiene, others joked about it in whispers. No one knew that the smell, years later, would be remembered as an unheeded warning. By the mid-1990s, Kendall had become a familiar figure in Poughkeepsie's red light districts. The city's economy had declined, drug use was rising, and sex work became a dangerous means of survival for many women. Francois frequented these areas, picking up women late at night. At first, some saw him as just another client, odd perhaps, but not immediately threatening. That changed after a few reported he had been violent, but without concrete evidence or willing witnesses, police could not act. In October 1996, 30-year-old Wendy Myers vanished. She was last seen climbing into Francois's car. According to his later confession, he took her to his Fulton Avenue home, strangled her, and hid her body in the attic. The smell inside the house worsened, but clutter and filth already filled the rooms. The Francois family, long accustomed to the odor, assumed it came from rotting trash or poor ventilation. 1 month later, in November 1996, 29-year-old Gina Baroni disappeared. She too had been last seen with Kendall. In December, Kathy Marsh, pregnant at the time, became his next victim. As with Wendy and Gina, he strangled her and hid her remains within the house. The interior of the Fulton Avenue home was a world apart from its quiet exterior. Garbage bags, piles of clothing, and discarded food containers crowded the rooms. The smell was overwhelming, but to Kendall's family, it was background noise, a constant presence they had learned to live with. They never discovered the hidden bodies. In early 1997, Francois struck again. 47-year-old Kathleen Hurley disappeared, followed months later by 30-year-old Mary Healy Giacconi. 51-year-old Sandra John French was next. Each time, the method was the same: lure the victim home, strangle her, store the body. Each time, the house absorbed more of the smell of death. The disappearances were not entirely unnoticed. Police had files on each missing woman, but most of the victims were sex workers, a population often overlooked by law enforcement in the 1990s. Cases stalled without leads. Even when Francois was questioned about an assault reported by another woman, the lack of physical evidence and the victim's reluctance to testify meant he walked free. Meanwhile, neighbors sometimes complained about the odor coming from the Francois house. Officers who visited for unrelated reasons gagged at the stench. Still, without probable cause, no one conducted a full search. By the summer of 1998, Kendall Francois had killed at least 7 women. His compulsion was escalating. On August 26, he picked up his final known victim, 25-year-old Katina Newmaster. Like the others, she never left his house alive. Francois might have continued killing indefinitely, if not for what happened days later. Another woman entered his home, but she fought back. Her name was Christine Sala. In the early hours of September 4th, 1998, she found herself in a violent struggle for her life inside the Fulton Avenue house. Unlike the others, she managed to escape, running barefoot through the streets until she spotted police officers. Sala's report was the break investigators had been waiting for, even if they didn't realize the scale of what they were about to uncover. Within hours, police obtained a search warrant. What they would find inside that modest home would shock the city, the state, and the country. It was not just a crime scene, it was a burial ground. For nearly 2 years, Kendall Francois lived under the same roof as his family and the decomposing bodies of his victims. He went to work, attended classes, and smiled at neighbors, all while carrying the weight of 8 murders. The city of Poughkeepsie would never be the same again, and when the truth came out, it would reveal not only the brutality of a killer, but the dangerous ease with which such evil can hide in plain sight. By the late summer of 1998, the quiet city of Poughkeepsie, New York, was beginning to feel the weight of an unspoken terror. People didn't talk about it openly, but the missing posters told their own story. Faces, mostly women, smiled from the paper and faded ink, taped to lampposts and bus stops. Each one had vanished without a trace, and police had no clear suspect. Yet behind the locked doors of a modest 2-story home on Fulton Avenue, the truth was rotting in the walls. Kendall Francois lived there with his parents and sister. From the outside, it looked like any other family home. White siding, small porch, trimmed lawn. Inside, it was a nightmare. Rooms were cluttered, filthy, the air thick with decay. The smell was so overpowering that neighbors could notice it, even from the sidewalk. Some thought it was just garbage. Others suspected something worse but kept silent. It was easier to look away. Francois moved through this environment like it was normal. He had grown up here, a towering figure, 6'4", over 250 pounds. By day, he worked as a hall monitor at the local high school. By night, he cruised the streets and back alleys where sex workers waited for business. He knew them, many knew him. He paid, they went with him, and then they never came back. Police were aware of the disappearances, but struggled with a case that had no witnesses, no crime scenes, no bodies. Without those, their hands were tied. Francois used that to his advantage. He was careful at first, methodical. He targeted women on the margins, those battling addiction, living rough, avoiding police. They were easy to lure, easy to disappear. Inside his bedroom, Kendall's killings followed a grim pattern. He would bring them in, close the door, and then during or after sex overpower them. His massive hands became weapons. The women fought, but they didn't stand a chance against his size and strength. Strangulation was his favored method, slow, deliberate, leaving him in control until the life left their bodies. When it was done, he would keep them there for hours, sometimes days, before hiding them in the attic, crawl spaces, or even between the walls. The Francois family claimed they didn't know what was happening under their roof. The house was large, with rooms sealed off, piled high with trash. The stench, they explained it away as plumbing issues, or simply ignored it. In truth, the smell was human decomposition. The home had become a tomb. By 1998, the missing women's list had grown. Police were under pressure. Families demanded answers. Activists accused the authorities of not caring because the victims were sex workers. And still, Kendall roamed free, picking his next target like a predator circling prey. His killings were not driven by haste. There was no rush, no panic. He was a man who believed he could not be caught, and why wouldn't he? For years, no one had connected the dots. Each woman's disappearance was treated as an isolated event. That false sense of security gave him confidence, and that confidence made him sloppy. In August 1998, Kendall made his mistake. A sex worker named Wendy, who knew the dangers of the streets well, got into his car one night. Inside his home, Francois tried to kill her the same way he had killed the others, but Wendy fought harder than he expected. In the chaos, she managed to escape, running into the night barefoot, her throat bruised, her body trembling. She went straight to the police. This time, officers listened. They had heard her name before, had even doubted her credibility in the past. But the bruises spoke louder than any doubts. She gave them an address, Kendall Francois' address. Within hours, detectives were knocking on the door at 99 Fulton Avenue. Kendall answered, calm, almost polite, as if nothing unusual had happened. He was taken in for questioning, but what happened next would stun even the most seasoned investigators. At first, Francois denied everything. He said Wendy had consented, that she was lying, but as the hours wore on and the questions pressed harder, his composure cracked. Then, almost casually, he confessed, not just to attacking Wendy, but to something far darker. He told them there were bodies in the house. Not one body, not two, but 8, all women, all buried in filth, just feet from where his family lived. The detectives didn't believe it at first. They thought it was a scare tactic, some bizarre ploy for attention. But when they stepped inside the house, reality hit them like a wall. The smell was suffocating, and in the attic, in crawl spaces, and beneath heaps of garbage, they began to find the remains. Each skeleton told a story of violence and fear. Neighbors gathered outside as police taped off the home. Some were in shock. Others claimed they always knew something was wrong. The Francois family was whisked away, avoiding questions. Inside, investigators worked for days, carefully removing bones and cataloging evidence. They wore masks, but the smell seeped into their clothes, into their skin. Some officers were physically sick. The women had names: Ketina, Kathleen, Catherine, and others whose families had waited years for news. Now they had their answer, but it was not the one they had prayed for. Kendall Francois, the quiet giant from their own community, had been living among them as a predator, hiding in plain sight. As the remains were carried out in body bags, the city's denial shattered. The nightmare had been inside their neighborhood all along, and for 8 women, justice had come too late. Poughkeepsie, January 1999. The snow outside crunched under the boots of investigators as they approached the decaying house on 99 Fulton Avenue, a place that had become infamous in whispered conversations, a place neighbors crossed the street to avoid. To the untrained eye, it looked like any other tired home in a worn-down neighborhood, but inside, the air was thick with the sickly sweet stench of death. It was here that Kendall Francois's reign of terror was finally exposed in full, a grotesque gallery of lives taken and discarded like refuse. The confession had opened the door. Now the crime scene would speak the rest of the truth. The front door groaned on its hinges as detectives stepped inside. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing a house in ruin. Piles of garbage and clothing were stacked high like barricades. The floor was sticky beneath their boots, a layer of filth that had built up over years. And then they found them, the bodies, one after another, hidden in various stages of decomposition. Some were wrapped in plastic, some were simply left to rot in the open air. The rooms were mausoleums of silence, broken only by the muffled gags of officers. As the reality settled in, each body had a name, a face, and a story, all cut short. Wendy Myers, Catherine Marsh, Mary Healy, women who had dreams, fears, and lives beyond these walls. Their families had waited for phone calls that would never come. Now they were reduced to evidence tags in a mass murder case that would haunt Poughkeepsie for decades. Forensics moved methodically. Cameras clicked, evidence bags filled. Every discovery deepened the horror: rope fibers, torn clothing, personal belongings, and always the smell, the inescapable reminder that they were standing in the center of one man's killing ground. Kendall Francois sat in an interrogation room as all this unfolded, his massive frame hunched over, his hands cuffed on the table. He spoke calmly, almost with detachment, as though recounting a grocery list. They didn't fight much, he told detectives. They just stopped. No rage in his tone, no remorse, just cold recollection. Prosecutors knew they had enough for multiple life sentences, but they also knew that trials in serial murder cases often reopen wounds for the victims' families. So when Francois agreed to a plea deal, 8 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, they accepted. Justice would be served, and the community spared the spectacle of a drawn-out courtroom battle. The sentencing hearing was quiet but heavy. Family members of the victims spoke through tears, their voices shaking with anger and grief. They described the mothers, daughters, and sisters they had lost. Francois listened without emotion, occasionally shifting in his seat, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the courtroom walls. Then it was over. Francois was led away in shackles, his bulk filling the doorway as he disappeared into the prison system, a place he would never leave alive. In his wake, Poughkeepsie was left to heal, though scars of such violence never truly fade. In the years that followed, the house at 99 Fulton Avenue became a symbol, not just of Francois's evil, but of the danger that can fester in plain sight. It was eventually demolished, erasing the physical structure but not the memory. Documentaries and true crime shows would revisit the case, trying to answer the same question: how could this happen without anyone noticing sooner? Kendall Francois died behind bars in September 2014, reportedly from natural causes. Even in death, he gave no closure, no new confessions, no deeper explanation for why he did what he did. The victims' families were left with the same void, the same why that had haunted them since the first disappearance. And so the story of Kendall Francois stands as one of Poughkeepsie's darkest chapters. Not a tale of mystery, but of neglect, of women whose disappearances were too easily dismissed, of a predator who exploited society's blind spots, and of the lives stolen in the shadows of an ordinary neighborhood, because sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones we imagine, but the ones living right next door,